Breaking news from Buckingham Palace, a royal bombshell that no one saw coming. King Charles III has made a declaration that has turned the monarchy on its head and ignited a firestorm across Britain. In a nationally televised address, His Majesty named Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the new guiding force of the royal household, effectively placing her in command of key royal duties and strategic affairs. And in a move that has left even senior courtiers speechless, Queen Camilla's power has been drastically reduced. This is not a symbolic reshuffle, this is a seismic realignment of royal authority, one that insiders are already calling the quiet coup. Within minutes of the announcement, the palace switchboard was reportedly flooded with calls from stunned officials and journalists. Social media erupted. The phrase, "She will lead now," began trending within seconds. For the first time since his coronation, Charles appeared visibly frail yet resolute, his voice low but deliberate. "Catherine will guide this institution with grace, compassion, and clarity," he said. Behind those words, royal commentators heard something deeper, a signal that the king, battling ongoing health challenges, may be preparing to step back from active leadership sooner than anyone expected. According to one palace aide who spoke under condition of anonymity, the decision has been months in the making, carefully choreographed by a small circle of advisors close to Charles. It wasn't spontaneous, the aide said. The king sees in Catherine the discipline of the late Queen Elizabeth, but also the emotional intelligence that modern Britain demands. But while the announcement thrilled supporters of the Princess of Wales, it struck a very different chord elsewhere in the palace. Sources close to Queen Camilla describe an atmosphere of disbelief, even humiliation. For years, she had been at Charles's side, shaping the tone and tempo of his reign. Tonight, that influence has been stripped away in one elegant but ruthless stroke. As royal commentator Julia Fraser put it on Sky News, "Camilla went to bed a queen consort with power. She woke up as a ceremonial figurehead." Another insider described the tension in the room during the announcement. "Catherine kept her composure, calm, radiant, but when the camera panned briefly toward Camilla, her expression tightened. It was subtle, but you could feel it. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. This may look like a peaceful transition, but the undercurrents tell a different story. Behind palace walls, factions are already forming. Senior courtiers aligned with Camilla are reportedly furious, claiming they were blindsided by the timing. One former private secretary told The Telegraph, "This feels like the beginning of a civil war, not between nations, but within the royal house itself." The palace's official statement, released moments after the broadcast, described the move as a modernization effort to ensure continuity and connection with the people. Yet those familiar with the inner workings of the monarchy read it differently, a delicate but decisive dethronement. "Camilla has lost her operational power completely," said a former communications director. "She can still attend events, smile for cameras, champion her causes, but make no mistake, she's out of the decision-making circle." Meanwhile, Catherine's camp is projecting quiet confidence. Those close to her insist she had no desire to overshadow anyone, only to serve. "She's not power-hungry," one longtime friend told the Daily Mail. "She's practical. She understands that in today's world, the monarchy has to evolve, or it won't survive." Still, few believe she's unaware of the immense weight this new role carries. The move positions her as the de facto architect of the monarchy's public future, and possibly its moral compass. In the hours following the announcement, public reaction was electric. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, holding up signs that read, "The People's Queen in Waiting," and "Long Live Kate." Online polls showed overwhelming support for the princess, with 78% of respondents calling the decision the right move for the future. But within royal circles, emotions are far more complicated. Insiders say Camilla's private response was measured but wounded. One source close to her described it bluntly. "She smiled for the cameras, but her pride took a bullet tonight." What happens next could determine the shape and survival of the modern monarchy. With Charles stepping back, Catherine stepping up, and Camilla quietly seething, Buckingham Palace has become a stage of silent war. And if history has taught us anything, it's that royal battles are never fought in public, they are fought in whispers, gestures, and perfectly timed smiles. The question tonight isn't whether Catherine will lead, it's how far she'll go, and what Camilla will do to stop her. Because, as one senior palace insider put it chillingly, when a crown is shared, it never stays whole for long. And that, sources say, is only the beginning. And as the cameras faded from King Charles's broadcast, the real story began behind closed doors. Within hours of the announcement, Buckingham Palace had transformed from a symbol of calm tradition into a quiet storm of whispers, phone calls, and locked doors. While the public celebrated Catherine's rise as the dawn of a new royal era, those inside the gilded corridors knew another narrative was taking shape, one that spelled trouble. According to multiple palace sources, Queen Camilla wasted no time regrouping. Within the polished, shadowed halls of Clarence House, she called together a small circle of her most trusted aides, the same loyal figures who had guided her through the turbulent years of Charles's early reign. They arrived discreetly, one by one, long after midnight. It wasn't a meeting, one insider corrected. It was a war council. Those present say Camilla's tone was icy, deliberate. She didn't shout, she strategized. They think she's done, a palace staffer confided. But she's been underestimated before. Plans were drawn, messages drafted, alliances revived. One former communications officer described the mood bluntly. They're preparing to remind Britain that Catherine may be the darling of the press, but Camilla survived a public crucifixion and still came out queen. The following morning, subtle movements began. Courtiers long thought loyal to the king quietly returned to Clarence House for consultations. Old journalist friends, those who owed Camilla favours from decades past, began circulating stories hinting that the Princess of Wales might not be ready for the immense responsibility now on her shoulders. It's not an attack, a former royal correspondent told ITV. It's positioning. Camilla knows how to plant seeds of doubt that bloom at just the right time. Meanwhile, Catherine kept her composure. Cameras caught her leaving Kensington Palace early, notebook in hand, to chair her first modernization meeting. She looked poised, serene, even, but those inside the room described an atmosphere thick with nerves. She's aware she's under surveillance from every angle, said one senior aide. Every move she makes now will be judged not as a princess's gesture, but as a leader's decision. The press, too, was divided. The Daily Mirror hailed her as the future in motion. The Express ran a headline reading, "Too much, too soon." On social media, debate raged. Number Queen Kate trended alongside number Camilla deserves respect. Every photograph from the Remembrance Service was analysed like evidence from a political thriller. Catherine's steady smile, Camilla's tightened jaw, the faint gap between them during the anthem. Then came the first leak. A confidential email chain between Camilla's senior aide and a tabloid editor appeared online. The content wasn't explosive, but the implication was it showed an effort to frame Catherine as unseasoned and media-managed. Palace officials refused to comment, yet inside, the tension spiked. "No one trusts anyone anymore," admitted a royal staffer. Every text could end up in the papers. Every whisper could become a headline. Experts began calling it the monarchy's velvet war. There were no raised voices, only measured tones and meaningful silences. "What you're seeing now," said royal historian Dr. Leona Gresham, "is the most sophisticated power struggle in modern royal history. It's not fought with words, it's fought with optics." Even so, behind the diplomacy, emotion bled through. Late that night, during a private dinner with confidants, Camilla reportedly broke her practiced calm. "I thought I'd finally earned peace," she murmured. "I didn't expect to be tested again. One of her guests recalled the silence that followed until Camilla added, almost to herself, "But if I must fight, I will." Catherine, by contrast, said nothing publicly. Her inner circle described long hours at her desk, reading reports, drafting initiatives, making quiet phone calls to allies within the Commonwealth. "She's learned from the Queen," a senior advisor said. "Lead by silence. Let others talk themselves into mistakes." By dawn, the palace tried to project unity. A new statement appeared on the royal website insisting that the household remains united in purpose. But few were convinced. Reporters outside Buckingham described the atmosphere as polished panic. One veteran correspondent whispered to the camera, "We've seen this movie before. Smiles on the balcony, tension behind the drapes." And somewhere, in that labyrinth of marble corridors, Camilla paused outside the king's private study. His illness had kept him in bed for days, but she hesitated before entering, hand trembling on the doorframe. "She still loves him," a friend later said. "That's what makes this cruel. She's fighting not only for power, but for the only life she's ever built." For Catherine, the challenge is just beginning. For Camilla, the fight has just begun anew. And for Britain, a nation watching every glance, every silence, every shadow, the question now lingers like a chill in the air. How long can two crowns fit beneath one palace roof? 2 days later, the palace facade of calm began to crack. Cameras captured Catherine stepping out of her car at an official engagement in Manchester, the first since the announcement. But her eyes told a different story. The smile was there, warm and poised, yet behind it flickered something else. Vigilance. Those close to her say she's begun to feel the weight of invisible resistance, subtle gestures from longtime staff loyal to Camilla, files misplaced, messages delayed, quiet looks exchanged in corridors. "Nothing overt," said one aide, "just enough to remind her whose territory she's walking through." Inside the palace, whispers of a shadow operation spread. Senior press officers reported receiving unusual calls from journalists they hadn't spoken to in years, all asking the same thing. Is Catherine really running things now, or is someone else still pulling strings? The question was clearly seeded. "Camilla's people know how to control the narrative," explained one former royal correspondent. "They don't need to issue statements. They just open the right doors for rumors to walk through." Oh. Meanwhile, Catherine kept to her schedule, showing no public sign of strain. At a charity forum for early childhood development, she delivered a speech that drew standing applause. "The future of our society depends on how we nurture its youngest," she said, her voice steady but weighted. Yet to seasoned observers, the choice of words carried a subtle sting. Nurture, trust, legacy. Words that echoed the public's emotional connection to the late Diana. Words that seemed to draw a soft but unmistakable line between the compassion of one woman and the ambition of another. One insider admitted that this moment, that quiet, precise phrasing, hit harder than any confrontation could. The press called it Catherine's masterstroke, and the timing couldn't have been more deliberate. Hours later, an image of her embracing a child in the audience went viral, while the next day's papers splashed headlines like, "The People's Princess Reborn." For Camilla, it was a public relations blow. At Clarence House, aides describe an atmosphere thick with frustration. "She watches everything," one confidant said. "She reads the headlines, the comments. She doesn't forget a single word." A close friend revealed that Camilla confided to her over tea. "Every photo of Catherine feels like a reminder that I'll never be loved that way." Her tone wasn't angry, the friend insisted. It was weary. She's fought her whole life to be accepted, and now, in a moment, it's slipping away again. By evening, tensions took a darker turn. A private memo circulated among palace staff, warning against unauthorized briefings or leaks. The message, though unsigned, was understood to come from Catherine's office. To Camilla's allies, it was a declaration of control. "She's tightening her grip," muttered one official. "Quietly, politely, but make no mistake, she's in charge." And yet, Catherine herself was far from triumphant. According to a source close to her household, she returned home late that night, exhausted. William greeted her at the door, his expression worried. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked quietly. "It's not what I wanted," she replied after a pause. "It's what's needed." She sank into a chair, removing her earrings, small diamonds that once belonged to Diana, and for a moment her composure faltered. "Sometimes," she whispered, "it feels like I'm living her unfinished story." That vulnerability, unseen by the public, contrasts sharply with Camilla's growing defiance. The next morning, she appeared at a literacy event in Bath, wearing an emerald green coat, a colour long associated with power in royal symbolism. The cameras flashed, her smile was dazzling, but those in the press pit noted something different. The stiffness in her jaw, the flicker in her eyes. One photographer remarked, "She looked radiant, but there was steel behind it, like a queen dressing for battle." And, as reporters shouted questions about her reduced role, Camilla simply replied, "I've never been one for titles. I prefer work that speaks for itself." The answer was calm, and yet it landed like a challenge. Within hours, talk shows were dissecting her tone. Was it dignity or defiance? One commentator said, "Camilla may have lost ground, but she's signalling that she won't be written out of the story." Not yet. Inside Buckingham Palace, aides now describe 2 courts within one house. Catherine's office operates with surgical precision, youthful energy, and the king's apparent blessing. Camilla's rooms, quieter but no less active, hum with strategy and pride. Between them stands a fragile truce built on formality and ceremony, yet eroding day by day. In the middle of this elegant battlefield, King Charles remains largely silent. His health has worsened, and those close to him say he avoids confrontation, clinging to the hope that both women will find balance. But even he must sense what's coming. As one insider put it grimly, "You can't have 2 queens under one crown." And so, behind the grandeur of palace gates, the duel continues. Smiles in public, maneuvering in private, hearts breaking quietly beneath diamonds and silk. The people see grace, the insiders see war, and for the monarchy itself, the question grows louder with every passing day. Which woman will shape the soul of the next royal age? The one who fights to be loved, or the one who loves enough to lead? By the end of that week, the royal silence had become deafening. Publicly, the palace projected stability routine engagements, polished photographs, ceremonial smiles, but privately, the air inside those centuries-old walls grew charged, electric with distrust. Catherine's new authority was quietly reshaping daily operations. Meetings once presided over by Camilla's senior aides were now led by Catherine's team. Press approvals, event briefings, even speech drafts, everything began flowing through her office. It was efficiency disguised as courtesy, control wrapped in civility. And those loyal to Camilla noticed. One staffer, speaking to the Daily Mail under anonymity, described the change as a velvet coup. "No one shouted, no one resigned," he said. But you could feel it, Camilla's presence shrinking. She'd walk into a room, and conversations would pause. Her influence was dissolving, inch by inch. Still, Camilla wasn't finished. She had weathered storms before public humiliation, tabloid hatred, years of being cast as the villain in someone else's fairy tale. Those who knew her best say that defiance began to reawaken. "She's a survivor," said a longtime friend. Every time people thought she was done, she found a way to climb back. Behind the scenes, she started reaching out to old allies, charity executives, society editors, even sympathetic MPs. Small gestures at first, handwritten notes, calls just to catch up. But to palace observers, these were signals. Camilla was rebuilding her network, said royal commentator Thomas Kent. This wasn't about public approval anymore, it was about leverage. Meanwhile, Catherine pressed forward, determined not to be drawn into palace politics. Her schedule was relentless: back-to-back meetings, public visits, private audiences. She listened more than she spoke, a habit that unnerved her rivals. "She doesn't need to argue," one senior royal aide admitted. "Her calm is her weapon." But even the calmest hearts have limits. Late one evening, Catherine returned to Kensington Palace after a particularly tense briefing. Her assistant found her sitting alone in the drawing room, still in her coat, staring at the darkened window. The city lights flickered beyond, cold and distant. "It's not the work that exhausts her," the assistant later confided. "It's the watchfulness. Every word, every expression, everything means something now." In the tabloids, the contrast between the two women became a national obsession. Camilla was framed as the seasoned veteran fighting for dignity, while Catherine was hailed as the future Queen Britain deserves. Yet beneath the headlines, both carried private wounds. Camilla's friends described her struggling with sleepless nights, pacing her study, rereading old letters from Charles, and whispering to herself, "He promised I'd never be alone again." And in a quiet moment of her own, Catherine confided to William that she sometimes missed the simplicity of their early years before the cameras, before the titles. "I never wanted to be a rival," she told him softly. "But I can't stand by and watch everything crumble." William took her hand, but his silence said what she already knew. This was no longer a matter of choice. Then, as if scripted by fate, the first scandal broke. A leaked document, apparently from a private royal briefing, suggested that senior figures had raised concerns about Catherine's influence over certain palace initiatives. The leak was timed perfectly, just hours before her keynote speech on modern monarchy. Though the palace swiftly dismissed the report as misinformation, insiders knew exactly where it came from. "Camilla's camp struck back," one courtier said flatly. "It was their warning shot. The timing couldn't have been crueler." Catherine's speech that day was meant to mark a new beginning: unity, transparency, reform. Instead, it became a test of resilience. Standing before the cameras, she spoke clearly, her voice steady despite the storm. "True service," she said, "isn't about holding power, it's about holding trust." The words hung in the air, simple yet cutting. To many watching, it was a statement of leadership. To those inside the palace, it was a response, a line drawn in the sand. Afterward, applause filled the room. Catherine smiled graciously, but as she turned away, her eyes glistened just for a moment. One photographer later remarked, "You could see it in her expression, strength on the surface, heartbreak underneath." Back in Clarence House, Camilla watched the broadcast in silence. When it ended, she set down her glass and said to no one in particular, "She's better than I thought." Her tone carried both admiration and resentment, a dangerous mix for a woman who's never liked losing. That night, rain swept across London. The palace lights burned late, staff moving quietly through the corridors, the hum of tension constant. Somewhere deep within those walls, two women so different, yet bound by the same crown, were already calculating their next move. One guided by patience, the other by pride. And as one palace insider whispered to the press the following morning, "It's no longer about duty or love anymore. It's about survival. And in this house, survival always comes at a cost." The breaking point came quietly. After weeks of uneasy calm, a new headline shattered the illusion. "Confidential Palace Memos Leak. Catherine's Overreach." The report claimed internal disputes over budgets and scheduling, hinting that the Princess of Wales was consolidating too much authority. Within hours, the story dominated every front page. The palace denied it, of course, calling it categorically false, but the damage was done. Doubt had been planted, and those close to Catherine knew exactly whose hand had placed the seed. Camilla's counterstrike had arrived. From her study at Clarence House, she watched the coverage unfold with cold satisfaction. Aides said she didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, She simply nodded once, as though checking off a box on a long, painful list. It wasn't about destroying Catherine, one confidant later admitted. It was about proving she could still move the pieces. Inside Buckingham, Catherine faced the storm with the same calm that had defined her ascent. But behind closed doors, exhaustion began to show. "Every day feels like a test," she told a close aide. "And even when I pass, someone changes the rules." Her public poise never cracked, but those around her noticed the subtle signs: long silences, untouched tea, the faint tremor in her hands after meetings. When King Charles summoned both women for a private audience, tension filled the corridors like static. Witnesses described the moment as palace history written in whispers. Catherine entered first, pale but composed. Camilla followed, every step deliberate, the faint echo of her heels cutting through the hush. For 30 minutes, voices were low but sharp. No one outside the door could make out the words, only the emotion. At one point, someone heard the king's cane strike the floor, a hollow sound that silenced the argument instantly. The following morning, Buckingham Palace announced a temporary restructuring of household duties, an elegant euphemism for Camilla's removal from decision-making roles. She would focus on her charitable commitments, while the Princess of Wales would support the king in strategic matters. In other words, Catherine had officially won. But victory inside the palace is rarely pure. As the press celebrated the rise of the modern queen, those close to Catherine saw something different, relief shadowed by guilt. "She never wanted to humiliate anyone," a family friend confided. "But she understands that the institution only survives if someone is willing to lead. And sometimes that means becoming the very thing she once feared." For Camilla, the loss was devastating. The morning the announcement was made, she cancelled all engagements and retreated to her private residence in Wiltshire. A housekeeper found her sitting by the window, the television muted, watching footage of Catherine greeting children outside the palace gates. "They adore her," she murmured, voice breaking. "And why wouldn't they?" She turned away, tears smudging her makeup. "I tried so hard to belong." Days later, Charles's health took a visible downturn. Public concern mounted as he was seen leaving hospital, frail but smiling. Catherine was by his side, her hand lightly on his arm, a portrait of duty and grace that reassured a worried nation. Yet behind that image, another truth lingered. The monarchy was changing faster than anyone had imagined. Camilla made one final appearance, unannounced, understated, at a small literacy charity event in Cornwall. She arrived without fanfare, wearing a soft grey coat, her expression distant but composed. When asked by a local reporter about her reduced role, she paused, then smiled faintly. "Every chapter ends," she said, "but the story always continues." That night, London buzzed with speculation. Was it farewell, or was it a warning? Even now, no one can say. What is certain is that Catherine's rise has redefined the monarchy's heartbeat, steadier, younger, but haunted by the cost of survival. As storm clouds gathered over the city, the cameras caught one last image. Catherine standing on the Buckingham balcony beside the king, the Union Jack billowing behind her. Far below, thousands cheered. But in the distance, across the palace gardens, a single car slipped through the gates. Inside, a lone figure in grey looked back once, then disappeared into the London fog. And somewhere in the echo of that moment, the monarchy seemed to whisper to itself that crowns may shine brightest, not when they're worn, but when they're fought for. Thank you for watching and following this royal storm with us. If you've been captivated by the quiet wars, the glances, the betrayals behind the palace walls, don't blink now, because this, dear viewers, is only the beginning. Subscribe, stay tuned, and be ready. The next royal revelation could change everything.